Hey guys, and welcome to the first ever episode of Film Eruption. I'm SolsetLava, and this is where I talk about movies. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Now, I'm going to start this review with a non-spoiler section, then I'm going to go into spoilers, so let's start with the non-spoiler section first. But before even doing that, let's talk about my feelings going into the movie. There was a lot of hype before the Rogue One movie came out, and there was a lot of excitement built up because it was the first non-saga movie that was being released, and I actually had some trepidations and hesitations and reservations going into the movie. The trailers didn't quite feel like the Star Wars universe to me. There was more of a science fiction feel to it that almost came across more like a sci-fi channel kind of made-for-TV movie, and I wasn't sure that the movie was really going to capture the spirit of Star Wars that I really have grown to love over the years. Not just that, but the way Jyn Erso's character, and she's the main character, the protagonist of the movie, the way she came across seemed kind of annoying in the trailers. She had this one line where she said, "This is a rebellion. I rebel," which seemed kind of snarky, and I didn't think I was going to like her in the movie. Thankfully, I can lay all those fears and trepidations to rest because the movie is actually really good. I like it a lot. And Jyn Erso's character was changed a lot from the trailers, and she's a lot more likable in this movie. But first, let me talk about the movie overall. I think it was really good. I enjoyed it a lot, and the story was actually well told. It was well directed. It was very action-packed and thrilling, especially towards the end of the movie. Jyn Erso's character was a lot better in the movie than she was in the trailers, although she feels more like an audience insert character as opposed to being a sort of well-defined character, and I'll get to that in just a bit. One of the things I really liked about this movie is that it really brings to life the whole concept of Star Wars, both the star part, as in it's set in space, and the wars part, as in it's an actual war. And I think almost better than almost any movie in the entire canon of the franchise. I think it really does a good job, not just of showing, outer space, alien worlds, but also of showing actual battles and a large-scale kind of conflict happening with all this, futuristic technology. Now, I liked the story of the movie overall. I thought it was very compelling, and it was very serious, but it was also dramatic in a way that didn't actually turn me off. I really liked the characters, too. They were all very likable. There have been complaints that the characters in the movie didn't really have a lot of background or backstory to them. They weren't very well developed, but I think for me, I thought that it was appropriate and it felt right, considering not just how many characters there were, but I really felt as though the movie wanted you to like the characters based on what they chose to do and what they were doing in the movie, as opposed to unnecessary, background information of the characters. You really respect the characters for the choices they make and their conviction in the movie, and I think that that was actually a positive for the movie overall. As I mentioned earlier, Jyn Erso, who's the protagonist of the movie, she kind of has a completely different character in the movie as compared to in the trailers. In the trailers, she seemed a lot more snarky, maybe even a little sarcastic, but in the movie, she actually seems like a generally nice person, and in some ways, I feel as though that might have been done to make her less annoying and more likable, and maybe even make her more like an audience insert character where you kind of feel like you're experiencing the journey through her. But in other ways, I kind of feel as though it's kind of hurts her character a bit. We're giving some background to her story as though she's had a troubled past. She's become kind of a misfit societally, maybe, and she's been a criminal. She's done bad things in the past. But over the course of the movie, you kind of feel like she's kind of not that bad of a person. She seems like a nice person who makes certain choices depending on circumstance, but it never comes across like she's a rough around the edges kind of person who would actually, choose to do bad things. So it's really kind of hard to tell. Still, she is very likable all throughout the movie, very well acted by Felicity Jones, and I really liked her. And there were some other standout performances in the film. Probably the most fan-favorite character, I think, for everyone would probably be K2SO. He's kind of a down-to-earth, almost kind of cynical robot in the movie. But you really grow to like him because he has kind of a sharp wit to him. He has kind of a dry humor that's kind of likable, but you know that there's a warm heart to him at the center, and it really shows over the course of the movie, and he's really cool. Now, I guess the male lead of the movie would be Captain Cassian Andor, who is a Rebel Alliance officer. Early on in the film, he helps to set the dark tone for the movie and to give a different look at the Rebel Alliance, that there are some bad aspects to it. Basically, he's shown to be willing to kill people in order to further the rebel cause. He was well acted by Diego Luna, but I kind of had a problem with his performance and Jiang Wen, who played Baze, because they both had kind of heavy accents, which made it a little hard to tell what they were saying throughout the movie. But overall, they both did very good as their characters, and I believed in them very well. Another standout performance was Chirrut Imwe. He was kind of a believer of the Force in the movie, and he was portrayed by Donnie Yen. And he was a very likable character, kind of someone who really believed in the Force, but not in a way that felt like overly zealous or overly religious, just as a kind of knowing character who has a lot of wisdom to him. What I liked the most about his character's role in the movie is that he kind of brought the Force into the movie and actually gave some layers to the Force that we didn't actually see in, for example, The Force Awakens. What I like about the portrayal of the Force in the movie is that it actually brings the Force to non-Jedi users in the world of Star Wars. In most of the other Star Wars movies, the Force almost seems more specifically like a tool that's tapped into by the Jedi, but that doesn't really have that much of an effect on anyone else. Rogue One actually shows that the Force really is kind of this universal mystical kind of thing, and Chirrut's character really kind of taps into that, but in a very humble kind of way. And I really liked that in the movie because it gave more depth to the Force, but also made it really feel like it was something that was universal to everyone that's living in the Star Wars universe. And I really liked that. I appreciated that about the movie. And of course, the big badass himself, one of the greatest villains of all time, Darth Vader, shows up in the movie. And he's only there for a short while. He doesn't overpower the movie. He only makes a few appearances. And I thought that it was sufficient and appropriate given the movie wasn't really focusing on him. It was focusing on the Rogue One team. That said, there is a sequence in the movie with Darth Vader that is absolutely astounding. And it's worth watching the movie just for that one sequence. Now, while I really think that Rogue One is an entertaining and likable film, I do have some mixed feelings about it. So I kind of feel like there's two different kinds of Star Wars fans. There are fans of A New Hope, and then there are fans of Empire Strikes Back, which I think are two kind of tonally different movies. A New Hope is more focused on kind of the adventure and lighthearted charm of the Star Wars universe, while The Empire Strikes Back is darker, is focused a bit more on the relationships, and has a more serious overall tone. Now, personally, I'm actually more in the camp of A New Hope. I really like the entertainment, the lighthearted feel, the kind of legendariness of the Force and all that. I'm more a fan of A New Hope than I am of Empire Strikes Back. And I think if you're an Empire Strikes Back fan, you'll probably really enjoy Rogue One, because Rogue One really does bring a grounding sense of realism and seriousness and a sort of drama to the Star Wars universe that kind of reflects in Empire Strikes Back. So for a person like me, maybe Rogue One doesn't strike me so much spiritually. Maybe I don't identify with it as much, but I can still appreciate it as being a part of the Star Wars universe and for what it actually accomplished in the film. There are a couple of other problems that I have with the film. There is the introduction of Saw Gerrera, who was acted by Forrest Whitaker, and then also Galen Erso, who is Jin's father, as portrayed by Mads Mikkelsen. And there are some aspects about their introduction into the story and how their characters played out that I didn't particularly find that believable to some extent, and I'll go into that more in the spoilers part of the review. And there's one glaring thing about the movie that I didn't really like, but I am kind of on the fence about in some respects. The movie does use CGI very well, almost 99% of the time. It looks beautiful. The action set pieces are gorgeous. The worlds that are portrayed are really believable. It's fantastic all throughout. However, there's this 1%, which isn't actually 1%, maybe it's more like 5 to 10%, but they use the CGI to portray some human characters in the movie, and it just doesn't look right. But I do think that it was used well, and it was actually, I think that it was important that they did use it for what they used it for, and it lent a lot to the story, so I'm kind of got some mixed feelings about it, and I'll go more into details on that later. Overall, I would recommend a Star Wars Rogue One If you really liked Empire Strikes Back, I think you'll really enjoy Rogue One. If you're a fan of science fiction and war movies, this is definitely a film for you. Now on to the spoilers. Probably the most important spoiler of all when it comes to the story is that all of the characters in the movie die. And a lot of people felt that that was going to be the case going into the movie, and sure enough, that's the case. And I really like that they did that, not just because it makes the movie more of a standalone product on its own, but also because it really gives more weight to all the actions that the characters took in the movie. It really gives that sense of seriousness and drama, knowing that everything that they did, despite them dying, was worth it because it all works out in the end, especially when you know what's going to happen in Episode 4. One of the great things about the movie is that it really is a lead-up to Episode 4. Like, the movie ends basically exactly where Episode 4 begins, and I thought that that was actually really clever and did a really good job of actually integrating it into the Star Wars universe. Now, I'd mentioned that I had some problems with Saw Gerrera and Galen Erso's characters. The problem I had with Saw Gerrera and Galen Erso is that I kind of didn't feel like their death scenes were very compelling or believable. Basically, the city that Saw Gerrera is in gets blown up by the Death Star, and he has a chance to escape with Jyn and the rest of the Rogue One crew, but he basically says, "No, I'm not running." And he doesn't explain exactly why he's not running, and it kind of bothered me because it felt like he had, he was an old man at this point, but he wasn't that old, and he had spent his life, surviving and fighting against the Empire, and for whatever reason, he just kind of decides, without any proper sort of explanation, that he's just going to stay and, get killed by the Death Star. I didn't feel that that was particularly believable. And as for Galen Erso, I think that they didn't establish strongly enough that he had actually died in the movie, and the way they portrayed it in the scene was that, he had been injured by a bomb blast from the rebels, and he was on the ground, but Jyn was talking to her in his dying breaths, and he said a few things, but then he went unconscious, and to me, I was like, did he really die, or did he just fall unconscious? And they didn't really visually show that he was, injured to a point where it was very clear that he was dead, but they kind of rushed the characters to say, no, we gotta get out of here, he's dead, even though it wasn't really clear that he was dead, for sure. So I kind of felt like, those two characters, their deaths were a little too quick, in my opinion. And now for the use of the CGI human characters in the movie. So, you may have probably already heard, or if you've seen the movie, you know this, they brought back Tarkin and Princess Leia in the movie. And I really liked how they actually integrated this into the story. I think it makes a lot of sense why they did it, because it really does fit as a lead-in into A New Hope. The movie shows that Galen Erso designed the Death Star. He was under the command of Krennic, who actually was in charge of making the Death Star, but it shows how that commanding power gets transitioned to Tarkin in the movie, and it makes a lot of sense that they did it that way. And then, of course, the movie ends with Princess Leia getting the plans and escaping from the battle, because that's how things start off in Episode 4. The problem, though, is that the CGI really isn't believable, and I think my issue with it is, when I first saw it, the first thing that came to my mind was, it's not possible for Tarkin to be alive, and it doesn't look like Tarkin, it looks like a CGI character, and I guess my biggest issue is that it kind of ruined the immersion for me in the scenes where Tarkin actually showed up, but also at the very end of the movie with Princess Leia. It just kind of, I don't like being taken out of the immersion of a movie when I'm watching. I don't like thinking about the actual production when I'm looking at the screen and trying to be immersed in the story. So, although I feel as though, in the long run, it was important that they did what they did, I'm on the fence. I have mixed feelings because it's so immersion breaking. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the scene with Darth Vader. So at the very end of the movie, there's this dark hallway that the rebels have gotten the actual information about the Death Star plans, and they're trying to escape to, get the plans to Princess Leia. And it looks a lot like, the first scene in Star Wars, where the rebels are in the hallway and they're preparing, for the Imperial officers to invade. But you can tell that this is actually a sort of different scene because it looks like the same hallway, but it's actually dark. And then Darth Vader appears, and Yeah, he's pretty cool. Vader just goes ham on all of them. He just starts walking down that hallway, and he's just slicing down dudes, using the Force to slam them into the walls and into the ceiling and cut them apart. And what I really liked about that scene was that it really showed how much, not just how much of a badass that Vader is, but it really encapsulated all of his powers without being untrue to the original trilogy and without being over choreographed like the prequels. You can kind of tell from his movements that his body is really kind of, in that burned state, that it's been, heavily injured over the years. We saw early in the movie that he was in one of the Bacta tanks, I guess for healing his body because it's still kind of messed up after all these years. So he moves down the hallway with kind of a directness and purpose that really reflects a character who's been through a lot physically, but is still really, really powerful and dangerous, and I really like that. So those are all my thoughts on Rogue One. I thought it was a really good film. It had some minor setbacks, and maybe I don't like it as much as The Force Awakens and A New Hope, because that's the kind of fan of Star Wars that I am. But I really do think that if you're a fan of the kind of tone and story that was shown in Empire Strikes Back, that this is a movie that you'll probably enjoy a lot. It really does a good job of richly realizing the Star Wars universe and telling a compelling story to boot. So I'm going to give this movie a rating of nothing. I'm not going to do ratings. I think having a sense for what you can get out of the movie relative to what I got out of the movie is more important than some number or score. So you're just going to have to take my word on it that I felt it was a good movie and that I think certain types of people will enjoy it for certain reasons. And that does it for the review. If you like this episode, feel free to hit that like button, and if you really like this episode, feel free to hit that subscribe button too. Are you excited to see Rogue One, or what were your thoughts on the movie? Feel free to comment below. That's all for now. You guys take care. I hope you all have a good one, and I'll talk to you later. Ciao.